Today is a special episode.
Okay. So how does shame get in the way of male friendships?
Yeah.
I think what comes up for me is that there's a lot of shaming in our culture towards men not to feel certain emotions and not to feel
Yeah.
a lot of any emotion.
Yeah.
And I think that creates disconnection between people when you feel like you can't feel and express what's going on for you. I mean, it even creates disconnection with yourself because you're sort
Yeah.
of repressing your own emotions and hiding them from yourself even. And that's what shame does. Like shame in me, shame comes along and its job is to diminish other emotions. And not just emotions,
Mhm.
drives, wants, needs. Shame can diminish any part of my kind of authentic desires.
Yeah. That sort of it doesn't leave room for like any sort of connection because you're like if you're just like have shame about connection, then you're not able to connect.
Yeah, so
So
connection
yeah.
is a basic human need. It's also like um intimate, so there's like emotion there. And yeah, for a lot of people, it might feel like they're not deserving of connection, or connection
Yeah.
feels unsafe, or connection is too intimate, too vulnerable. So
Yeah. It's like
shame
this
wants
is too
to come in.
much. Yeah.
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 And keep things kind of superficial, or keep things really kind of status quo, keep things light, or whatever the norm is that they're trying to fit with. Maybe it's to keep things like cool and detached, or maybe it's to keep things just like light and not
Yeah. Like
heavy.
we don't want to touch certain things, certain
Yeah.
areas, and like I think that I, I've always kind of tried to like figure out like what is like why is this friendship or connection like why is this so hard? And I feel like shame has a lot to do with it. We feel
Yeah.
I was actually I don't know if you know Marissa Franco
No, I
and
don't think so.
her book on friendship talks about like attachment. She goes into all that stuff, but I think like doing it from like a shame perspective, like shame really does like make us feel ashamed. If we feel like shame within ourselves and if we're not like connected to ourselves, number one, and then if we like feel like shame for our desires for connection and like we believe that like that you don't need it or whatever,
Yeah.
or shame for your needs, then that's
Yeah.
like you can't really have connection. So
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, so shame's trying to do that so that we don't get rejected. So it's
mhm.
sort of ironic that like we are essentially hiding our truth so that we can safely connect, but in doing so, we're not connecting as fully and honestly and deeply as we could. So it's kind of like
Yeah,
is saying you got to settle for a kind of um, disappointing, middling connection, a superficial connection, because
yeah,
anything else is socially inappropriate, dangerous, and might get you completely rejected. So it's like take what you can get rather than being rejected for your true self. That's kind of what shame is
yeah.
saying.
That's like that trade in that we do. We try to trade in, I guess, our authentic self with like this, I guess, superficial level of like connection. And yeah, I think that like says a lot about like men in particular about like how yeah, I think that says a lot about shame and stuff like that. So
Yeah. And it starts in our family, it starts in our early childhood. And it's the messages we
mhm.
get from our family system and from our culture that tell us what
Yeah,
we should hide. what's not appropriate. And
Yeah.
we don't have the luxury of, just finding a new family where we fit in. So we kind of
Mhm.
have to do that to survive. It's really important that we not get rejected as a child, that our needs get met. So as a child, it's actually like quite healthy and adaptive to suppress parts of yourself if they're making you unsafe around the adults that you need to survive. But
Yeah.
then as we grow up, we're kind of, those get wired in and we're stuck with them, even though we actually have an opportunity to, in this huge interconnected world, to find people who would actually like us because of the things we're hiding, if we didn't hide them,
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of and then there's just that risk of like I'm risking um showing myself, and it's like that risk of um like risk doing that with like the right person. And I think like yeah, I think like there's an aspect of that too where um you're risking to show yourself with like the right person. And I think that actually does lead to like true connection is if risk that. So
Yeah, but it could get you rejected.
yeah, I
It's
could use
a gamble.
it
So
too. So,
it
yeah.
if it's well received, it almost certainly creates deeper connection. You're being more honest. They see more of the real you. And probably
Mhm.
if that doesn't really repulse them, it would actually almost certainly invite them to kind of meet you there and to show you kind of more of themselves. But it's a
Yeah.
gamble. It could trigger their shame, and then they're going to have a
Yeah.
disconnected reaction. If someone triggers our
Yeah.
shame, we want to get away from them because we don't want to
Yeah.
be
That makes sense.
associated with something shameful because then we might get rejected.
Mhm.
So it's sort of
Yeah.
like shame is trying to protect me from your vulnerability, which could get me rejected by other people. So it's a gamble whether or not someone's shame will get triggered and whether they'll be able to handle that or not.
Mhm. Okay. That makes sense.
But
Yeah.
then it
That,
begs the question, when you're an adult, it's when you're a child, it's slightly different because you really need adults to survive, and you don't get to choose which adults they are. So you kind of have to avoid triggering them. Uh, But as an
yeah.
adult, you then have an opportunity to decide, oh, like if this
Yeah.
person can't handle my truth, why do I think I need to be connected to this person? Maybe I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. And like you don't have to settle for a type of friendship that you don't want if it's like not if they're not like fully accepting. So you don't have to like settle for that because I think
Yeah.
yeah, as like a child, you feel like that this is literally all that there is. But when you're an adult, you can like choose who like who you want to in your life. And I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
it can be like a lot more freedom towards that.
Yeah. It's hard though, because, you know, it's possible that you're kind of immersed in a culture that you feel very different than. Um,
Mhm.
and there just might not be a lot of people that you're exposed to that are like you. Like some people are neurodivergent, some people are trans. Like there's all kinds of
Mhm.
minority differences that we could have that might seem like there's just no one else like us. Um, so that can be really hard to be like, where do I'd have to like leave my whole community to find this? Or maybe you can start
Yeah.
online at least, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, and it's also hard because your own shame will also be there telling you what's cool and what isn't. So you'll be fighting
Yeah.
shame in the front of yourself as well as the shame of other people because our culture is sort of interconnected like that.
Yeah.
I have my parents' shame. I inherited it and I fight against it.
Yeah.
But it's a job to deal with my own shame and their shame, you know? It's
Yeah, at
hard
the
to
same
know
time.
who's right. What if they're right and I'm wrong, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think that another question that comes up is like, what do like men do to like that like sort of like sabotages friendships or yeah friendships based off of shame. Like I guess like I kind of
Mm.
talk about like behaviors or like things that like might sabotage that.
Oh, good question. A few things come to mind. Like,
I think for me,
yeah.
well I don't like have to like totally talk about that, but I think like for me what I like observed is just sort of just being like when the friendship gets more close, you kind of just like remain distant, sort of. I don't know if you like relate to that, but
As the friendship gets close, you get more distant?
you can like remain distant because that like shame comes up. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, well, I could see how like, you know, closeness and intimacy is itself a bit shamey, especially for men. Like,
yeah,
so there is a kind of way in which like getting too close could feel dangerous, uncomfortable, could trigger some kind of avoidance. Um,
hmm,
and I also think there's a lot of competition that gets brought up by shame, a lot of hierarchy and status.
yes, yeah,
So there might be someone that you really feel connected to, but then other people signal to you that they're not cool enough or they're annoying or something like that. So then you
yeah,
have to get into this kind of status games where you're like, oh, if I hang out with them, I will lose these other people who I think are cool. Or
hmm,
competition and status can show up like I need to be the one who's high status. So you're always kind of like almost negging your friends to keep them below you. And so you
yeah,
get these weird power structures. And then there's some people who you kind of prefer to have above you because they take charge or they make decisions or whatever. So it actually feels better to give away some of your power to them. And then you're going to be dishonest with them. They're going to be like, it's a great movie. And you're going to be like, yeah, I loved it.
yeah. So you're not
That's
really like very honest.
yeah, you don't want to challenge their higher status place. So you get kind of locked in these hierarchies that I think also get you stuck in patterns that are a little bit inauthentic and a little bit
Yeah,
superficial and distant. And it's to
yeah,
create a kind of social safety again. But it's just
yeah,
not as deep as if you could actually be like, you know what? I disagree. I just didn't like the movie. Like, I say,
yeah, yeah.
or not have to like push down or avoid people to make yourself feel better than them. That thing as well.
Hmm, yeah. Yeah, I think if we have like behaviors that try to protect our shame, then that means that we can't show up fully. If we just have like those like shame's like sort of the core, and then like our behaviors are trying to like protect around it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
then that sort of keeps us like shielded up for like a potential friendship. So
Yeah, well, I would say at the very core is our authenticity, which is
yeah,
like authentically what we really want and authentically
yeah,
what is true for us. And then around that is shame, saying, okay, but is this acceptable? And then around that is our defensive patterns, what we do
yeah,
to avoid shame. And as like we talked about in the book, there's like the compass of shame that looks at sort of like obvious strategies. So you can kind of
yeah,
map those strategies pretty easily what they are. But there's a lot of denial in shame. So you likely won't be able to see what the authenticity is because that's denied. And you won't be able to see the shame because that's also in denial. And you won't be able to acknowledge that these are defensive actions because that's also all in denial. So it's like you're
yeah,
also you're also disconnected from yourself. It's not just your friends. You might not even
Yeah,
know what your authenticity is if it's shamed enough.
yeah. Just won't like you're just won't be like aware of be aware of that, and that makes total sense now.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I think like that. I think I think I'm trying to incorporate that into like writing about this because I think we don't like necessarily understand like the full extent of shame. I feel like
Yes. Yeah.
of how it like like this like is this definitely like affects how we go about like friendship and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because shame, once again, is trying to protect our relationships, protect us from getting rejected. So,
Hmm.
and I think it's worth noting that, like, when we were a hunter gatherer, we couldn't afford to be rejected by the tribe. We would die.
Yeah, this is another thing
And
about like being rejected from the group.
so it feels really dangerous, even though it's not as dangerous as it was, though it can still be quite dangerous. And it's also true in childhood. Like in childhood, you really can't survive rejection very well, um,
Mhm.
or the kinds of mistreatment that might come up if you don't shame parts of yourself and hide them.
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
have a lot of instinctual pressure that says, I really need to fit in with these certain people.
Mhm.
And that's really hard to let go of. It feels like danger. That's what shame is. It
That's
feels
where the
like
risk is.
danger. Yeah. It feels like
Yeah.
unsafety. It feels like risk. So it
Okay.
is a form of fear in a way.
Yeah, it is fear that you kind of have to like risk doing that. So, and I think like I guess like um I don't know like what other question I should ask. I think so. I think I want to ask like if we're like trying to overcome shame and like develop those relationships, like what I guess like what are like what would you say is like kind of like the beginning to try to overcome that? Like, do we need to start with? Of course, we need to start with ourselves, and then just like take that risk.
Yeah. Well, it's a big question, Um, and I don't think there's like one clear answer,
Yeah, it's not like
unfortunately,
that
to
only
how
one
we
clear
begin.
answer.
But what comes up for me is in the lens of relationships, particularly male relationships. Like, what would, in the context of a relationship, what could help shame? Um, well, as you've already kind of said, sorry, the more we can, you know what I find actually really helpful when I'm trying
Mhm.
to like broach shame or vulnerability in a relationship is to really just focus on feelings in the present moment. Um,
And I
if
think
I
that's
can,
probably where
pardon?
I think that's probably where we like struggle is like in like feelings. I think because that like area, it's just so kind of um like socialized out of us.
Yeah.
So then we like I think yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. So it's like that's also the place you're not like really even supposed to be feeling things in your body. That's
Yeah.
you're supposed to be like a robot. Uh,
Yeah.
so it'll be hard to notice. It'll be weird. So okay, so there's that's maybe might be advanced. It might then be better to start theoretically because I find that the easiest way to kind of talk about shame at first is just totally in theory.
Mhm.
Like, oh, I've been I've been learning about this emotion, shame, and I've like learned some interesting facts about it. So I'm not talking about like my shame or your shame or anything
Yeah,
in the
so it's
present moment. It's the opposite of that. It's just the theory, like apparently it's an
like
emotion.
in the head, like it's like
Yeah,
sort of
keep it cognitive, keep it
it's more like
theoretical.
head versus like heart.
Yeah, because where we're trying to get is the heart, but the head is what our culture is more comfortable with, particularly men who get socialized to be like very logical, rational. That could be a safe inroads to just sort of talk about fascinating facts about shame. Like, for example, that shame, a lot of people believe, has the power to control other emotions and diminish them. So it's like that's
Yeah.
just a fact about shame that most people don't know and are like, really? How is that true? So you could kind of have like an
Yeah.
intellectual discussion about it that is in a way a bit of a Trojan horse into people then being like, okay, so if that's true, like how does that happening in me? Are there like emotions in me that get pushed down? Oh yeah, actually there are. Yeah, that's right. So that could kind of open up an interesting gradual conversation.
Hmm.
Just cool facts about shame that might lead us all into getting more comfortable to the point where we might be like, yeah, actually, remember how we talked about shame, like diminishing other emotions? I was watching this like sad movie and I started to feel like sad. And then I was like, oh
Yeah.
no, I don't want to feel sad. And I like pushed it down.
Yeah.
And I think like
Yeah.
that actually might be shame right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely feel like a lot more comfortable um with like writing the book because like even when like starting to write stuff down, it's just like there's I feel like there's this aspect of shame that like affects all of us, and I think I
Yeah.
definitely wanted to like include that in the book because yeah.
Yeah, and shame doesn't always have to be like super heavy. It's on a
Yeah.
very light level. Anytime I'm looking at myself and saying something like, oh, I shouldn't do that, I should do this, is a bit of shame in there. It like that.
And yeah, and like like shoulds. That's another
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah. Shoulds, right and wrong. Anytime that you're like kind of telling yourself what you think should be happening or what you think you should be feeling or doing or thinking,
Yeah, doesn't
you're
create
using
any
a
room
bit of shame.
for doesn't create any room for like authenticity if you're just going by like
Yes, yes.
shoulds.
Authenticity is what we don't choose. We don't choose
Yeah,
authenticity. And shame
yeah,
attempts to choose. That's what shame is. It's like when we try to choose who we are, that's got a bit of shame. When we just look and notice what's actually happening, that's authenticity. So in a
yeah,
way, it's huge. It's way bigger than people realize. The move of trying to control yourself because we do it
yeah,
all the time.
yeah,
Like, if you're in this conversation right now and you notice like, oh, I'm getting kind of bored and distracted. No, no, I shouldn't. I got to pay attention. And I'm not saying that's a
yeah,
bad thing. That's actually probably a good thing, but it is using a little bit of shame to suppress part of your truth
yeah,
in order to be who you want to be. And so that's not bad, but it is still a window into how big shame is in our lives.
yeah. That doesn't create room for like a more authentic or like creative type of connection with
Yeah, yeah,
that.
exactly. And if you do it all the time, you're run by shame and you're going to be really disconnected from what's actually meaningful for you on an authentic level. So you're going to like
Yeah,
life will be depressing You because
Yeah.
like our authentic emotions are kind of like the best thing we have. Like that's where joy, pleasure, passion, meaning, purpose live is in our unchosen stuff. And so if we're constantly choosing and rejecting what is naturally there, we're going to really be in a painful place.
Yeah, I guess like that type of like existence is yeah, it's not a good existence.
Yeah,
And
why am I unhappy? Why am I unmotivated? Why am I depressed? It's like because all of your authenticity has been shamed away. And so
yeah,
you don't even know what brings you passion and joy because it's been hidden from you for safety
yeah,
reasons. And you didn't do
yeah,
that. It was something you had to do. It's not your fault.
yeah, I can't like yeah, it's like you don't know yourself. So if you don't like know
Yeah.
yourself, you can't just like be expected to have like I guess like
Yeah.
emotional intimacy. You can't have that because you don't like know.
Yeah. You don't know who you really are. So
Yeah.
it's really, you meet people and they seem kind of fake or something is just off. And it often is something related to that. It's just that like you sense on a level that you're not really getting the real them, that they're like behind
Mhm.
some kind of wall, there's some kind of performance or mask, and it's uncomfortable to be around
Mhm.
because it just feels fake. It's hard to put your finger on, but you will be sort of turned off. And so it's ironic that like we do that to try to fit in, but by doing so, we actually not only
That
do
actually
we
creates more
connect deeply, but
disconnection.
we kind of repel some people.
Yeah.
So it's a very
Yeah, that
sad,
creates
and it's like I really want to emphasize that it's not something that people do consciously, and it's not their fault. It's
yeah.
something they had to do as a child to survive, and then it just gets wired in, and they just do it unconsciously. It's just a pattern.
Yeah. That, yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that kind of opens a lot of like
Go
what's
ahead.
that?
No, no, go on.
That kind of that kind of opens a lot of like points about where I'm going with this topic is that like and I can like tie that into like the way that men have been socialized. Was kind of like what where I want to start is that we've been socialized
Yeah,
away from that.
yeah,
So away from like our authentic emotional self. So like
yeah,
now we're not like able to connect, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. So it
Yeah.
really is. It's a cultural problem. It's a societal problem, and it's a family system problem. Like
Mhm.
the way that the culture and society gets to you is through your caregivers.
Yeah, that's how like because they like teach you like the culture and like like what's like no, don't do this. And so like,
Yes.
kind of just yeah. And I feel like now like I feel like I'm thinking I think now I like we just like have we need like a lot of like grace for ourselves because we kind of
Yeah.
just like don't know and we're just like learning how to
Yeah.
connect
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've been on this shame healing road for getting close to a decade, and it's still lots of shame, lots of, it's still really difficult. And it's like the metaphor I use is like it's like learning a second language as an adult from scratch. So
Yeah.
my first language emotionally is shame. And now I'm trying to
Mhm.
learn a different emotional language. And it's as difficult as if I just started trying to learn Chinese right now. And that takes
Yeah.
years to learn Chinese. And
Yeah.
you never learn it quite as good as you do in childhood. And that I think is a very accurate analogy for what we're trying to do when it comes to like changing these patterns.
I
And
guess like my
there's no Duolingo for that, and I can't just go to China I can go to China and immerse myself in Chinese, but it's not like you can just do that for healing per se, unless you can find really healthy people. But it's like you don't even know what they look like. So it's like
Yeah,
you're learning a language without a map.
yeah. So
So
I guess like
it's a life journey.
my next like question is like kind of like what inspires you to like write about the book and
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just have so much shame. Like
oh, okay.
I am like
Yeah,
a chronic shame kind of person.
yeah.
Um, and it just, when I started in therapy to notice that that's what it was kind of like I was seeing the workings of my problems in a fascinating
And
way.
where like the root of it,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like
for sure.
this is the root of it for sure. That's how it felt.
Yeah,
And the more I understood it, the more I like understood myself and my patterns
okay.
and my behaviors and my emotions. And so it was like getting a view on my own, like I called it an instruction manual for yourself. It's like, oh, I'm getting to see the instruction manual for how I operate and for how a lot of people operate, for how we all operate to some extent. And that
Yeah.
was just really fascinating and empowering um and it healed me a lot, but it also my shame is so clever that it also like it kind of capitalizes on everything in a very subtle way. So in some ways
Mhm.
I healed a lot of shame, but in other ways I also like um
Brought it up
solidified
to the
other shame.
surface. Yeah.
Like,
So I guess like if you try to like heal from it, it like kind of brings it up more.
well, it's sort of like two steps forward, one step back, because
Okay.
if you have like a lot of shame, like I do, you will try to solve every problem using shame. That's like as a child, it was like, okay, how am I going to protect myself? Shame, and it worked. So now that's my go-to strategy. So when I discover that I have an issue with shame, how I'm going to try to fix it is shame, and that just
Oh,
doesn't work.
okay. Yeah.
You get
Like you shouldn't
trapped.
have a problem with shame.
Yeah, you can't heal shame using shame. That's
Yeah.
it's like that is like one step forward, one step back. You go kind of like in this loop. And so I have been trying to figure out how to get out of that loop for a really long time. And I still feel like I'm making maybe two steps forward, one step back. And a lot of it is just because shame is very subtle. And the act of saying, like, oh, I need to have a better relationship with shame is in itself non-acceptance. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
you will use shame to try to change your shame. And so it's really hard to try to be like, okay, wait, yes, like I don't want to be like run by shame, but I also kind of have to accept that to some extent I am run by shame. So there's like a paradox there of like, Carl Rogers talks about the paradox of change being nothing changes until you accept it fully. And that is a kind of a perfect example with shame. Like you kind of have to find this way of accepting it completely in order to move beyond it. But if you're trying to get rid of it, you're shaming your shame and you're trapped.
It's like trying to like fight against this like part of yourself. So you're trying to like fight this versus just like accepting it. And I think like maybe like we're afraid of that acceptance. We might be like afraid of accepting that because that means like defeat or something. Like I
Yeah.
don't want to
Well,
accept that. So,
because I, as a child, had to hide a lot of my authenticity in order to not trigger my caregivers, the way I interpret that, and this is the way every child is going to interpret it, is, oh, well, there must be something wrong with my authenticity. So you
yeah.
have to convince yourself that there's something wrong with you in order to do the moves that protect you from the people you need to survive. And so
Mhm.
that gets wired in. There's something wrong with me. And so it's hard to accept yourself when you have this wired in belief that there's something wrong with you. And it almost is like a meta acceptance, is because it's like, how do I accept that I think there's something wrong with me without fully believing it anymore? You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah,
this, it's a kind of meta acceptance. Like you have to
yeah,
move one level beyond where the non-acceptance is and accept it from like a bigger, almost spiritual place. Like, yes, inside of me,
mhm,
there's a powerful part from childhood that thinks there's something wrong with me. And I accept that part from out here
yeah,
rather than being
yeah. And I
like
can,
trying to fight it with
or
shame.
kind of like, accept that. I guess you can call it the inner critic, or you can
Yeah.
accept
So I'm
that.
like, I'm accepting that there is an inner critic, but I'm not like accepting what it says as true anymore.
Yeah,
But I'm also not shaming the inner critic because the inner critic is shame. So that's
yeah.
just
Or
two
just
inner
like,
critics fighting it out.
yeah, I just make it
It's
worse.
very, very subtle, delicate stuff.
Yeah, and it's a lot. So it's a lot, and I think like there's more to this like um like friendship dynamic. Like there's more to it when it comes to shame, and like how we show up in and relationships. I think there's more to it, to the dynamic. Um, yeah,
How do you mean?
like I mean, like there's more of what we've been taught to suppress this, and how we're told to suppress parts of ourselves, but also like have that outer edge, that outer shield. Um,
Yeah.
like there's like so much to that, and like that how that creates dynamics. So
Yeah. Yeah. You get into these kind of codependent types of relationships that are really hard to break out of,
mhm.
or status type relationships. Someone's above, someone's below. It's kind of the same thing. And they
Like
they get a certain kind of gratification from being above, and you get a certain kind of like gratification from being below, or
yeah,
and we all have both. Like there's people probably that you will perceive as sort of lower status and you'll kind of treat them one way. And then there's people who you'll perceive as higher status and you'll treat them a different way. And they'll kind of treat you the way you treat these other people. And it creates a weird kind of like system that you get stuck in.
weird dynamic.
Yeah. Like a family
Yeah.
system. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I think and as I go into my psychology career, I kind of really want to say attachment, but we've looked at how attachment is in romantic relationships. I don't think not a whole lot has been written about friendship and that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great topic because I do think like codependent stuff happens in friendships all the time, and you get stuck in patterns and systems, and they're unhealthy and they lead to authenticity and disconnection and I think like resentment and um
Yeah,
yeah, I'm kind of going through a thing with a bunch of my friends right now where we're trying to kind of see who does have more status, and it's different for each person a little bit. Like
yeah,
somebody is above me, but for one of my other friends, they are below them, and there's different opinions about what, and we're just trying to like break out of patterns because it just, yeah, it gets
yeah,
boring and it gets stagnant.
yeah.
And I
I
think
think
it's hardest the longer the pattern has been going, the harder it is to break.
mhm.
So that means the harder it is to be fully authentic with the people you're closest with, in a way.
Yeah, that is, yeah, it does like does make it hard. And I think shame has a lot to do with like attachment. So if you like show up as like avoiding attachment or whatever,
Yeah.
then that like says a lot about like sort of that you have shame around normal emotional intimacy. So you just like, you know, pull back.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that like has lot to say about that.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. To be whatever the opposite of your attachment style is, will no doubt trigger shame. So if you're
Yeah.
avoiding and people are like really trying to connect with you, it'll feel unsafe, at least. Whether you want to call
Mhm.
that fear or shame, I don't know, but it will feel unsafe. And
Yeah.
probably there will be shame, ooh, getting too close to people is bad. And then if you're like
Yeah.
preoccupied, it'll be the opposite. Like being alone means I'm shameful and bad. I need to be
Yeah.
around people, or I'm bad.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like sort of always having to like needs someone. And I think I don't know. This is like my perspective. I think men probably struggle more like on the avoidance and I don't know like how true that is. I just feel like it's like my perspective. Um,
Yeah, I would say probably stereotypically.
like stereotypically, it's
Well,
like kind of like that.
the stoic masculine kind of island of a man is definitely more avoidant. Um,
Hmm.
but I would say this is how it lands for me, that avoidance might be more like the male ideal, but I don't know if that means that most men actually are it, if that makes any sense.
Okay. So that they're not. So like, the ideal is of like to be like avoidant, but that's not their natural character.
It might not be, because I think it's almost like if you look at what culture used to say was the ideal man, he wasn't necessarily, he didn't have a lot of needs. Like he met everyone's needs, and
Okay.
he was never needy. So yes, I would say that, like, almost like as a culture, in Western culture, we've idolized an archetype that is slightly avoidant. Um,
Okay.
but
Or
I
that
might
like
not
reflects the
actually
avoidant
be
attention.
avoidant just because I'm trying to look like that. I might
Yeah.
actually be preoccupied.
Yeah.
So I actually
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if most men are or aren't, but I could see why you would say that, because that does seem to be like the character most men are being taught to kind of emulate.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference between attachment style and like what you're trying to emulate. You could be preoccupied attachment, but trying to create the image of being this like stoic kind of person.
Yeah, that
There's a thin
too.
line there, because one is from
Yeah.
childhood and one is a little bit more like maybe an older act.
Cultural. Yeah.
Because if in your family system you needed to be preoccupied to feel safe, then that's what you will be. But then in high school, you
Yeah.
might discover, oh, people are rejecting me for being too needy. So then you're going to add on some shame that will push you a bit avoidant, but you probably still have at your core. So then I don't know how you would parse that. Like, do you
So
become
so yeah, it
disorganized?
also yeah, I guess it could be just like both. So and it also has like a lot to do with like our story, um, the stories and narratives that we tell about ourselves, but like people can't be trusted. People, you know, about
Mm,
through the trauma of having our vulnerability rejected. And I think
yeah.
that's what Marissa Franco emphasized in her um, book on friendship and attachment. It's like we in the past our vulnerability was rejected. So in the for the future, we create a story, I guess a shame based narrative
Yeah,
to protect our future. So
totally. Yeah.
it's,
Yeah. So it's internalized. That's, I would think of it as internalization. Like,
yeah,
um, I was, what you're calling vulnerability, I'm going to call authenticity. Like I showed this part of myself.
yeah, yeah,
And I experienced from my caregivers or some important people a sense of disconnection or rejection or a rupture. And so the way my shame comes in is it says, oh, what you just did is bad. You need to suppress it. And the way that it gets internalized is I'm going to create a part inside that disconnects internally from me so that I stop myself before someone outside could disconnect from me. So if
yeah.
the
Kind of like
caregiver
you're,
yelled at you when you cried, then you'll internalize an inner critic who yells at you when you feel like crying. And
yeah,
that stops you from crying so that your real caregiver doesn't yell at you, which is safe.
yeah,
So that's where we come up with a story like, oh, well, vulnerability is bad, or you can't trust people, or something like that. It's like we've internalized a kind of self critical thing to stop us from receiving messages like that for real.
yeah. Interesting.
If I
This
tell
feels
myself that
like,
no one can be trusted, then I will never put myself in a situation where I get to test whether people can or cannot be trusted. So I
yeah,
will be betrayed
yeah,
again.
yeah. You're trying to, like when you're trying to protect yourself, you're not like creating room for like more connection in your life because you're just, you know, if you live in that in those narratives. So,
Yeah. That's, Brene talks about living disappointment.
yeah,
I'd rather live in the disappointment of no one can be trusted than test that and inevitably discover that that person actually can't be trusted, but that person can because that's painful and it feels
yeah.
dangerous.
I was about to like say that like that's painful to
It's painful,
discover
yeah.
that, so we kind of like avoid that.
Even
Yeah,
if it's not dangerous, it's painful. So, yeah, it's painful. We don't want to feel pain, and it feels dangerous because of
yeah,
our instincts and our childhood.
yeah,
So that's why I like the word, the title, discomfortable, is there has to be some ability to sit in discomfort, or you will be controlled by your defenses to avoid feeling discomfort at all costs.
yeah. And I think the truth is that men are well. I'll say I don't want to. I'll say men can be just like uncomfortable with the discomfort. Does
Yeah,
it, if
yeah.
that makes sense?
Yes, I think absolutely. I actually have a kind of pet theory. This isn't really like scientific, but
Yeah,
because our culture allows and encourages women to be more emotional, I think
mhm,
women actually have more capacity to sit with emotional discomfort than men do.
yeah,
And I think when I look at a lot of relationships, I see like heterosexual relationships, I notice that the man is often inadvertently, um, in a way, controlled. This is all happening unconsciously, but the man is essentially controlled by avoiding the woman from going into some emotional discomfort that he can't handle.
yeah, yeah. And that
So you get
is
into kind of
trying
like
to,
a caretaking role.
yeah, yeah. So
I
you just
have to
want
make
to
sure.
like
Go ahead.
you want to be in a position where vulnerability can't happen. I guess you try to make yourself in that position. You know, by playing like these roles, you know, whatever it is, um, whatever that might be. Another book I read is uh, wait, I think it's The Mask of Masculinity. That's a good book.
Mm.
because it talks about the different masks that like men wear to cover that like that shame or that yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And men are supposed to be caretakers in a certain way anyway, like safety providers or something. But if every time your partner gets upset, you have to fix it, then you don't have a lot of agency because you can't control the emotions of another person. So it's almost like you're trapped at the whims of some emotion. And actually, there's a possibility to just let people feel their emotions and then have agency to decide, like, oh, is this something that I can just sit here and they can feel their emotions and that's fine. And I don't have to change anything. Then I'm not controlled by someone else's emotions. So I do think, in a way, men are more susceptible to that control simply because they're not socialized in a way that allows them to get exposure to discomfort as much. I think we're exposed to a certain kind of like physical labor discomfort, or you know, we're exposed to discomfort in a kind of like certain way,
Physical sense.
physical and just and like kind of like pushing against emotion, but we're not great at just sitting with someone's pain and not feeling like we have to
That's
fix
another
it.
thing. That's another thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you could argue that a similar thing is often true for women if they're in a caretaker role with children, that it might be similar, that it's hard to just sit with a child's pain when you feel like it's your job to fix it all. So it's like,
Yeah, that
in our
yeah,
culture,
that's
the
kind of
woman
like
fixes the child, but the man fixes the woman. So in a way, it creates some kind of unhealthy lack of agency on both fronts.
yeah. Yeah, I
Uh,
think this is like
we should wrap up. I don't have to end right this second, but start to wrap up in the next like kind of 10 minutes sort of thing.
yeah, I think this was like a very like thought-provoking discussion. And I think that I have a lot of like points I want to make for my book. A lot of ideas that I want to make because I think this is an
Have
important
you
aspect.
have you started writing? Like, where are you at? Are you outlining as
I
just
started like
an
yeah, I
idea?
started like outlining things. I'm still like in the process of like writing more of it because I still want to like talk to like different authors and like psychologists to see like how like what sort of like blocking us from connection, but also like how can we um like overcome those barriers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. But you're also in school, so I imagine you're quite busy.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think just talking to people that have like written about it, I think it's yeah, and shame because shame is definitely important.
Yeah, yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it comes together gradually.
Yeah, I'm excited. So,
Anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think I have anything else. I think you like answer like a lot of questions I had, and it helped me like understand um the like the topic more and like myself more. So it helped me understand a lot of stuff.
Cool. Yeah. Well, keep me posted as it comes together. I'd be love to see it come out into the world. So let me know.
All right.
Cool. Nice to meet
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too.
you. All right. I'll let you go.
All right. All right.